Well, good morning and welcome to ELEVENSES. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late today. The computer decided it would do its reboot for an update literally just as I was about to go online. I don't know why it decided then, because it's supposed to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, here I am, and you are tuned to ELEVENSES. Right, I've got a fair amount to talk about on today's show. The autumn has arrived, as you may have noticed. Well, very suddenly, leaves have started falling off the trees, and with that has come some severe weather, thanks to a couple of decayed hurricanes which are on the way. Sadly, a holiday couple have died in heavy rain in a crash in northern Spain. Well, have a quick look at the world's oldest bike racer. 97-year-old Les Harris is still competing on his motorcycle. Hats off to him. Problems ahead of India's first MotoGP race, though, and a quick, very official update on Kawasaki's electric motorcycles, which are due to arrive here next month. MV, though, have cancelled what was described as the affordable MV, the Lucky Explorer 5.5. That's gone by the board, and we'll have a look at the rather complicated reasons why that is. X350 and X500 Harley twins, they're headed to Australia. So it'll be interesting to see if we get those here in Europe too. A single pot Ducati has been spied testing in Italy. We'll have a quick look at that, and we'll round off with the hybrid Honda that apparently is under development, before finishing with our in-depth item today, which is taking the hairy out of hairpin bends. Now, don't forget, if you have a question, a comment, anything you want to ask, anything you want to say, do drop me a line. I am always fascinated to hear what you have to say. Love your comments. I'll try to answer if I can live. If I can't do it live, I will do it after the show. Right, okay, so Kevin and Steve and are both here. I can't actually do much with the sound in the middle of the show, I'm afraid. See, Steve asked for the sound to go up, but unfortunately I can't really do that very easily within the show. As far as I'm aware, the sound is pretty much set on maximum. And Christine's looked in too. Right, okay, so on with the show. Now, first thing to say in today's show is the weather that is on the way. Don't forget that it's always a bloody good idea to keep an eye on the weather forecast when we're riding motorcycles. The thing that I know people say they're not accurate, they don't show you the right thing, but what they do give you is the overview, the big picture. And there's a lot of severe weather around the UK after our hot spell. Now, yesterday you saw strong winds. There were gusts of over 70 miles per hour on the Isle of Wight, for example. So just as well I was there last week and not this week. Now, the current spell of bad weather is all connected with the remnants of Hurricane Lee, and that was a pretty fierce Category 5 storm, the highest rating for a hurricane, and that's working its way across the north of Scotland today, and that will fire a band of heavy rain and strong winds across Wales and England during the course of the day. Now, right at the moment it's reasonably bright outside, if a bit breezy, but the worst of the winds will probably be somewhere running Devon and Cornwall to about Yorkshire about now. So whilst we're starting reasonably calm here in the east, it will perk up. 50 to odd miles per hour possible, and that definitely is enough to create disruption, and western Scotland will see gusts of 60 to 70 miles per hour. So if you are out on a bike this afternoon, do think about that. Thursday and Friday, gales forecast for northwest of the UK, and there'll be heavy downpours just about anywhere from isolated showers. Saturday does look like the best riding day, but as we go into the end of Saturday through Sunday and perhaps into Monday, the remnant of another hurricane, Hurricane Nigel, could be arriving in the vicinity of the UK. Now, that's still pretty flexible. Some forecasts show it moving sort of north towards Iceland, others show it brushing north of Scotland. So do bear that in mind if you're planning a ride this coming weekend. But there is just a chance, and I say it's just a chance, that next week could see a return of some warmer and drier weather, at least in the south and east of England. And even further off, there's a hint that temperatures could remain somewhat above average for the first 2 weeks of October. So here's hoping we do get a nice autumn. Right, okay, some sad news though, connected again with bad weather. A couple from Norwich have been killed in what's been described as a freak motorcycle crash in northern Spain. Kieran Haynes, 68, and his wife Sharon, 65, were killed instantly after they crashed in heavy rain last Monday on the A8 motorway near Oviedo in northern Spain. A spokesman for Spain's civil guard said the pair were killed when they crossed over a road line and the motorcycle skidded. They both fell and they were hit by a truck, and sadly they died instantly. Now, investigations into the cause of the accident are still ongoing, but the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office are in support of the family who died out there. Yeah, just a reminder that white lines abroad aren't always the same grippy stuff that we get over here in the UK. Now, out in Auckland, a bit more cheerful news. Earlier this year, Leslie Harris raced at the Pukekohe 43rd Classic Motorcycle Festival in Auckland, and that makes him the world's oldest competitive motorcycle racer. Now, competing at the age of 97, Les competed along with his eldest son Rod, he's 64, and his granddaughter Olivia, who's a mere 21 years old. Now, the three generations of the family took part in what's called the regularity race, where the aim is to actually perform the most consistent lap times. Now, he was riding his 175 BSA Bantam, and Les finished 4th overall. Olivia, in her first competition, she ended up 21st on another of Les's Bantams, and Rod placed 8th. Les actually won the event in 2019, aged 93. And having entered the 2020 Classic Festival to defend his title, he broke 6 ribs when his bike slipped off the starter rollers. And of course, the next 2 years' events were cancelled due to COVID restrictions. Now, sadly, the 2023 festival at the Pukekohe Park Raceway is the last ever. The historic track has apparently now been sold, which is a bit of a shame. But Les is planning to enter more events this year, including the 44th Classic Festival, which will be held in February 2024 at the new venue of Manfield Circuit Chris Amon at Fielding. So there, hats off to a veteran racer who's pushing the frontiers for all of us, showing it can still be done. Now, something that isn't going so well on the racetrack is out in India. Now, India is, of course, a rapidly growing market for the worldwide motorcycle industry, which is why the MotoGP circus has been keen to stage a race in the country. But putting the event on has proven even more challenging than was expected. Now, for starters, the circuit itself is still awaiting FIM homologation. The race can't take place without that, and it's expected that it will be granted the very day before the bikes actually head out onto it for practice. So cross fingers that they actually do get that completed in time. And other complications have been said to be arising on a daily basis. There have been tax problems. Some riders apparently have been required to pay a portion of their income in local taxes, and many teams are still without the necessary visas to travel to India. Dorna, the championship organiser, had apparently an agreement with local authorities to simplify the formalities, but the local agency appeared to have been overwhelmed by the number of electronic visa requests. There are around 2,000 people in the travelling circus that is MotoGP. Now, several teams are still waiting for visas, and Aki Ayo, he's the head of a Moto3 and a Moto2 team, he said that some of his team members have been unable to leave on booked flights. Jens Heinbach, he's the Vice President of Racing for Pira Mobility. That's the group which includes KTM, GasGas and Husqvarna teams, said none of us have an electronic visa yet, and about 50 of us are leaving tomorrow. That statement was tomorrow, so hopefully they got underway today at some point. Now, don't forget, you can set a reminder to see this show It comes out every Wednesday and Sunday at 11, and usually live, occasionally recorded, and very, very rarely there's no show as I'm doing something else. So do pop over to youtube.com Survival Skills UK if you want to catch up with any of the old shows. And don't forget today's show, we've still to come. We have the official update on the Kawasaki e-bikes. We have the MV Lucky Explorer cancellation. We have the Harley Davidson twin news, and we'll be looking at the single pot Ducati as well, and a hybrid Honda story before we move on to the in-depth item. So plenty still to come if you missed the beginning of the show. Right, a couple of comments. We have okay, Steve says sounds fine, problem at his end. Phew, that's good news. And Aaron says Pukekohe wasn't sold. The horse people owned it and had an agreement with the car people. The horse people want to develop the facility, and that doesn't include motorsport. Okay, thank you very much for that update, Aaron. I will duly correct the record then on that one. That was news to me. Wasn't in the story that I saw reported from an NZ anyway. So good to get the correct news on the story there. All right, okay, let's move on to looking at some motorcycles. And what have I got to tell you about today? Well, the first thing to talk about is a very quick mini update to Sunday's update on the Kawasaki e-bikes. They are now listed on Kawasaki UK's website, though no price is shown as yet. But interestingly, the claimed range is stated as 72 kilometres on the what's known as the World Motorcycle Test Cycle. That's an officially devised test which is said to represent real-world driving conditions for covering everything from urban traffic to open highways. So that's 45 miles, and frankly, given the tiny size of the batteries, they're just 3 kilowatt hours, I would be very surprised if the bike made it anything like that far in mixed riding. I guess it's possibly the absolute best possible mileage from a sort of a brimful 100% full battery to totally out of juice. I suggested 30 miles as more realistic from my estimates, and I'll be interested to see if real world tests, when the bike's actually available to test ride, confirm my guess on that one. Right, now, okay, if the Ducatis, if the Kawasaki's are due anytime soon, one bike we won't be seeing, unfortunately, is an affordable MV, the Lucky Explorer 5.5. Now, I did feature this particular machine in previous shows, and there's a picture of it, what it was looking like. The Lucky Explorer link was basically a throwback to the Lucky Strike sponsorship from the cigarette advertising days. The bike was quite a handsome looking thing, but in the current messy business world of motorcycle ownership, who collaborates with whom and who owns the other, it requires some fairly serious detective skills to unravel. None of the stories really are murkier than MV Agusta, so let's have a quick look about where their brand actually comes from. Now, ostensibly it's Italian, but it's actually majority owned by a UK Russian investment fund, and Timur Sardarov is the CEO. But back in November 2021, Pira Mobility, who you'll remember I just mentioned is the owners of KTM, Husqvarna and GasGas, now they agreed on what was termed a strategic cooperation. They took a 25.1 stake in the formerly Italian flagship company. Now, last November it was announced that KTM would take over purchasing, provide MV Agusta with supply chain support, and partly distribute MVs via KTM's worldwide distribution network. Now, this was no great surprise really, because it all revolves around a Chinese manufacturer called Lonsin. Now, Lonsin themselves entered into a long-term strategic partnership with MV back in 2019 with plans for an all-new Italian-designed but Chinese-built motorcycle, whilst MV's Varese Development Centre was available to help Lonsin develop their Vosges range of motorcycles. Now, Lonsin and KTM, I hope you're following this, were already partnered with the Lonsin-owned CF Moto range using modified KTM engines for their larger capacity machines, and they're now selling those not just in China, but a couple of those bikes were actually sold by KTM in Europe, as well as being sold as CF Motos in Europe. And of course they're also building small capacity bikes for the Asian market under the KTM banner. So the Lonsin KTM MV link make some kind of sense, but what about MV's prior tie-ups? And here is where it gets seriously confusing. Before the link up with KTM, MV Agusta were partnered with another Chinese manufacturer, QJ Motor. They're an offshoot of Qianjiang Motorcycle, the largest manufacturer of power two-wheelers in China. QJ Motor were due to take over 7 MV stores in China, and they were going to open another 21 by the end of 2021. And Benelli, another Italian brand, is also part of Qianjiang's portfolio. So it wasn't surprising then that the two companies were working together on the development of this MV Agusta Lucky Explorer 5.5, because the project basically uses the Benelli TRK 502 engine, actually built of course by QJ Motor. So I hope you followed all that. Now, I did wonder at the time exactly how this was all going to pan out, because it hardly seemed likely that the two Chinese companies would happily work side by side with the Varese outfit, both supplying sort of manufacturing, both getting sort of intellectual property in terms of the development of the motors. Anyway, coming forward, the Lucky Explorer 5.5, the bike in the photo there, in case you've forgotten, that was supposed to have appeared 2021. At the time, the pandemic shutdowns, of course, were a convenient excuse for its non-appearance, but it appears now, according to MV, that research and development on the Lucky Explorer 5.5 is currently, quote, temporarily halted. My guess is that the affordable MV will never see the light of day. So, if that wasn't confusing enough, back at the end of 2022, I announced that Harley Davidson were also working on 2 new motorcycles, the X350 and the X500, and that this partnership was also in partnership with the Chinese manufacturer QJ Motor. Something that may also have affected MV's decision to end the Lucky Explorer 5.5 project, by the way. Now, to be honest, with the fuss about the launch of the Indian-built X440, I'd completely forgotten about these twin-cylinder machines, so I was actually quite surprised when I heard that Harley had recently announced that both of these machines are heading for Australia, where they both fit into the LAMS category, that is, learner approved machine. Now, the X350 gets a liquid-cooled 353 4-valve double overhead cam parallel twin motor producing 27 kilowatts, 36 horsepower, so reasonably pokey, more pokey than the X440 single actually. And the Harley Davidson say that they're the other bike of the pair, which is this one here, if I get a picture up for you. There it is, the X500. They say the styling is inspired by their Sportster, but the machine shares the frame and motor of the QJ Motor built Benelli Leoncini 500. So this is a liquid-cooled, fuel-injected 500cc double overhead cam, 8-valve parallel twin, 33.9 pounds-feet of torque at 6,000 RPM and 46.9 horsepower at 8,500. And of course that would make the X500 bang on the A2 Euro license limit, just like the Benelli, should Harley Davidson decide to bring the bike to Europe. My guess is that they just might. Right, so another manufacturer which tends to aim at the premium end of the market is Ducati. And, you know, I've said it in the past that one of the things that they do lack is an entry-level machine at an affordable price. Now, the company have argued that profit margins are too small at the bottom end, but they arguably forgotten that it was the budget Monster 600 that actually saved the company's bacon financially, because it sold in droves. So, was I surprised to see this machine being tested out in Italy? It's possibly an indication that Ducati could be coming back with an entry-level machine. On the other hand, maybe it isn't. They might still decide to price it at the top whack. So this prototype here, sort of seen in the Super Motard guys, has been spotted testing in Italy. And if you think there's something missing from the front of the bike, you're correct. It's actually the front cylinder. What you'll see there is actually the sort of V-twin motor with the front cylinder lopped off. Now, it's said to be a 650 cc bike. There are certification documents which have apparently surfaced in the US which say it's a 4-valve liquid cooled unit. It's expected to produce between 75 and 80 horsepower. Now, one comment on my regular Rev to Limit forum said, given how small the niche market for a hyper motard is, I can only assume Ducati must be using the new engine as a platform for a range of other bikes. Well, of course, the hyper motard format may not be desperately popular in the UK, but it is popular elsewhere. But it's almost certain, I would have said, that they will use this engine in a range of bikes. So maybe, just maybe, a new baby monster powered by that single engine. The big question is, will anybody buy them? Now, Ducati have had a range of singles in the dim and distant past, but it's long out of the memory of anybody, modern buyers who associate the brand with their V-twins. So whether a single would appeal, who knows? I don't know. Price also unknown right now, but I think to attract buyers, it would have to be a very, very attractive price, right down at the sort of the budget end of the market. And in fact, just like the original monster. So let me know what you think about Ducati there as well. I'm always interested, as I say, to hear what you have to say. Right, now as we search for an electric future for motorcycling, one of the things that we need to see are more energy dense batteries, really, to give bikes longer ranges for less weight, and we certainly need charging infrastructure, which is currently lacking desperately across most of the world, I think, and possibly battery swap technology, like that little Kawasaki I was mentioning earlier. They are swappable batteries. So how do we ease motorcycling towards an electric future? Well, I've said for a while that I think that possibly the best option is actually to go hybrid. Now, the electric motor in a hybrid can clean up the bike's act whilst it's in pollution-sensitive areas like city centres, but incorporating an ICE solves the range anxiety problems that are currently deterring many riders from considering a fully electric bike, and best of all, in a way, that by combining a moderately powerful ICE with which will deliver excellent fuel economy when cruising, of course, combining it with an electric motor, the electric motor offers a power boost and a sort of punch away from the line, a surge of acceleration for overtaking, for example, when needed, which could allow for a very usable motorcycle indeed. So personally, I think it's rather a surprise to date that only Kawasaki has shown any interest in the concept, and right now there are no hybrid bikes on sale. Kawasaki have suggested that their hybrid will appear in 2024, but Honda could be about to join the hybrid party. The company has filed patents for a new motorcycle which appears to be based around a Honda NC750 derived chassis with a multi-cylinder internal combustion engine paired with two brushless electric motors, one of which can apparently operate as a generator, making the bike a fully self-charging hybrid. Now, I'm not sure why exactly the bike also includes a continuously variable transmission. I would have said that is actually an unnecessary complication, as well as being a feature that many motorcyclists themselves wouldn't actually want. Most motorcyclists actually like a gearbox, unless the aim is to build a maxi scooter. And you will hopefully remember that the NC 750 platform did actually have a scooter built on that chassis at one point. Now, I was actually surprised to discover there was a version of Honda's PCX scooter launched in 2018, which actually was a hybrid originally. It had a small lithium-ion battery to boost initial acceleration. Now, I don't know if it was recharged whilst riding. Apparently, it only went on sale in a few markets anyway, and it was reportedly a poor seller. My guess is that it may have had a premium price. I haven't been able to find any details about it, but that really is something that normally puts off the youngest riders who are looking for a bit of a bargain here. Right, okay, don't forget, if you want to read something about motorcycling, you can check out my books on my publisher's website. That's lulu.com/spotlight/survival skills, where you will find books on all aspects of motorcycling, from developing your skills, that's the survival skills books, to the mental side of riding. That's my mind over motorcycle book. Do pop over there, have a look, and if you fancy a read, maybe you'd like to buy one. Now, into today's final item. It's the in-depth look at slow control that I've been carrying on over the last few shows. And I did say that we get to hairpins today, so we will. Now, I will only deal with uphill hairpins. You'll see why when I carry on with the explanation, really. But the question I just want to pose to you, really, is, mental issues aside, from a technical point of view, what's a hairpin bend but a kind of U-turn? The problem is, mentally, riders don't see them as the same. Somehow riding around cones is fairly unthreatening. If you get it wrong, you just knock a cone over or ride it off into the distance on the car park where you're playing. But if you get a hairpin wrong, it can be fairly unforgiving. But technically speaking, there is no significant difference. What we do really is we simply ride into a hairpin at speed, and we carry on around it at speed, rather than doing what we would do on a U-turn, which is start from a standstill and finish at a standstill. That's the only real difference. Everything else is standard hairpin technique, exactly what I've been talking about over the last few weeks. Bracing knees against the tank to get a good posture, keeping the upper body loose, avoiding leaning on the tank, keeping shoulders, neck, wrists all loose. And remember the machine control aspect, slipping the clutch, balancing the forward drive of the bike against the rear brake. That's really crucial, and we'll see why. Looking as far around the turn as possible, something else that helps us get around a U-turn or a figure of eight, absolutely crucial on a hairpin bend. We also need to remember that we use that counter steering nudge to initiate lean into the turn. That's also vital. And the skill of using counterweighting, that's where we lean away from the corner and push the bike down underneath us, which helps keep the line good and tight while still maintaining speed for balance. I've covered that in the previous shows, so if you missed those and you want to know more about that, do backtrack, do look at my YouTube channel, and you'll find the shows there. Wednesdays these items have been going out. So let's break down what we do for a hairpin bend stage by stage. And here's a bit of good news: unless we already live at the top of a mountain, we will have to go up the mountain before we come down again. Why is that good news? Well, because actually the uphill hairpins are just a wee bit easier, the downhill ones, because we don't have to brake downhill for an uphill hairpin. Now, the second bit of good news is, unless you happen to come across a hairpin in a deeply wooded area, in fact rather like the picture that you can see, that is actually Dorset, famous road in Dorset with a couple of surprisingly sharp hairpins on it. You can generally see hairpins coming from some distance on a mountain road, so it's also worth knowing what the sign for a hairpin bend is. There usually is one abroad. Actually, I've only ever seen one in the UK, a sign for a hairpin bend, and bizarrely it's in the Thames Valley on a steep descent to a bridge crossing the Thames at Marlow. Now, how do we approach a hairpin bend? Well, I mentioned that the difference between a hairpin and a U-turn is that we approach a hairpin rolling rather than from a standstill. So the first requirement is, just as it is with any bend, is to match our speed to the corner ahead. So we don't just match our speed to the radius of the bend that we can see, we match our speed to allow us something in hand in case the bend is actually tighter than it looks, or it gets tighter as we go round it. So here's my first tip: decelerate early. The mistake a lot of riders make is to rush up to the bend and brake for the last moment. And you know, if your more experienced mate is doing that, let them go. Get your speed off in plenty of time. 30-40 meters back isn't too early. It may sound crazy distance to be slowing down, but get the speed off early and everything else comes with more time. It really is a key point. If we've got the speed off, we have more time to pay attention to the bend, and we won't be worrying about running out of road. And that means we've got the mental freedom to actually drag our eyes away around the corner. Running too fast, you'll be looking at where you don't want to go, for sure. Now, second thing I'll say about slowing down is don't over rely on engine braking, even if you have a bike that delivers it in spades. Even going uphill, it's not a bad idea to use the brakes lightly rather than entirely rely on engine braking, because if you discover that you are misjudging your approach speed in the last few seconds, if you're already on the brakes, gently you could squeeze them just a little bit harder. If you're not on the brakes, you'll have to apply them, and then you'll end up braking harder. Think about it. It takes you longer to go from no brakes to brakes than it does from gently on the brakes to a little bit more brakes. So you will be braking harder and later. There's a second good reason for using the brakes, because if you brake properly, you'll be using front brake and rear brake, and we're going to need the rear brake in a moment. It's far easier to remember to have a foot on the pedal if you actually started with your brakes on going uphill. Both brakes, you'll keep that rear brake on. And there's a third reason: actually braking uphill's good practice for what's coming next when you get over the top when you're going downhill. Now, secondly, having got the speed right down in plenty of time, get into position early. Like any other bend, a wide approach line helps, but even if your more experienced mate is showing you the lines and he's riding right to the very edge of the lane, don't copy him. If you're on the outside edge of a sheer drop, the mental focus is going to be staying on the road. It's inevitable, particularly if you're not so experienced on hairpin bends, you're a little bit nervous with it. You won't be concentrating fully on getting around the corner. So the first thing to say is come in a metre or two from the very edge of the lane if you are on the outside of the corner and you're looking at a sheer drop. A couple of metres in the end, inside that line will take all the pressure off. Well, not all of it, but it'll take a lot of the pressure off. Yes, it will make the turn a little bit tighter, but it will be a lot easier to make that turn if we're actually looking where we want to go and not where we don't want to go. Now, if we're on the inside of the turn, so where the van is in the photo in front of you, we can use all the lane out to the centre line because there is more tarmac on the other side of it, but it doesn't give us any margin for error. If we run a bit wide, we're immediately onto the wrong side of it, and potentially we'll be at risk from bigger vehicles coming the other way that may be cutting across the corner. So I'm cautious about trying to turn the corner from too wide a position. Third, get into low gear too in plenty of time while still upright. Second gear is usually right for the bigger hairpins, but it may be necessary to select first to get around a really tight, steep corner. The one in front of you actually slopes uphill a lot more than it appears in the picture there. So 4, get off the brakes and get on the throttle while you're still upright approaching the corner. Remember, we want to drive the bike through the hairpin. We're going to need to drive the bike around against the uphill slope. So what we don't want to do is be decelerating into the middle of the bend and then try to hit the power halfway around. That's the guarantee to destabilize the bike. That's when people get themselves into a big tangle and they end up dropping the motorcycle around halfway around a tight corner. So having got everything sorted out, gears, brakes, speed, position, not necessarily in that order of course, but having got all that sorted out, get your head turning. That's the next thing to do. It's no good looking under the front wheel. We need a real turn of the head to follow the road around the corner, and that, again, getting the speed and position sorted, knowing that you're not going to overshoot the corner, that really helps here because it frees up your vision. Now we may be able, if we're lucky and the terrain allows, we may be able to look right around the bend and away behind us to see what's coming up from the next stretch of road uphill, if there's anything we need to worry about coming the other way. And that will give us an overview of how sharp the turn is as well, how steep the turn is, and what we need to be doing with the power. Now, finally, we're getting to the point of the corner, and this is where you remember everything that you learnt on U-turns on basic training. It's exactly the same manoeuvre, as I said, just rolling into it uphill and driving away from it on the far side. So you'll need to slip the clutch on the really tight ones, and if you discover that second gear was the wrong gear and it should have been in first, rather than try to drop down to first at the last second, consider slipping the clutch in second gear. It can be done on any bike. And somebody denied that it was possible. I promptly demoed a U-turn by slipping the clutch in top gear and doing a perfect U-turn some years ago. So remember that we can slip the clutch not just in first but in higher gears too. And finally, remember that the rear brake is what we use to balance the throttle to fine-tune our speed. If we're driving the bike up the hill on the throttle, if we've got a little bit of rear brake on, the back brake will be holding the bike around. So if we start to lose speed as we come into the mid part of the corner, which is often the steepest part of the bend, rather than try to adjust the clutch and throttle, we can just come off the rear brake and get that extra drive as the rear brake releases. And then when we come around the corner and we start to pick the bike up straight, the thing to do is keep a foot on the rear brake. A big temptation is to think, well, I've done it now, off the brakes, and suddenly the bike is picking up speed and heading towards the outside of the turn. So remember, don't come off the rear brake too early either. Don't forget, you will need a counter steering nudge to get the bike to lean, and then you'll need to use counterweighting. That's where, as I explained, you sit upright and the bike goes down underneath you to get the bike turning tight whilst keeping the speed up. The biggest mistake to make on hairpin bends is to ride them too slowly, because that's when the bike starts to wander all over the road and you actually end up with a wider line around the bend than if you've gone in a little bit faster and used a little bit more lean. We don't want to be scraping pegs around them, but we do need enough speed to keep the bike self-balancing. So as I said, halfway around the turn is usually the steepest part, and it's often most pronounced on the inside of the corner, and this is where the engine is likely to bog down. So be ready there to ease off the rear brake, and if absolutely necessary, put on a little bit of extra power. But do remember, as the bike comes out of the corner, as it starts to come upright, it will come out of the steepest part of the turn, and that's when there's a risk of running wide. So again, the rear brake comes in handy here, because that's what controls your speed onto the following straight. Only when upright and headed up the road towards the next bend do you want to ease off the rear brake, and then you can accelerate away up the hill as normal. Right, that is enough for this time. That's uphill's hairpin sorted. So last one on the series will be next week out, and we'll be looking at the more tricky downhill turns. Right, thank you very much indeed again for watching. So if you have enjoyed the show, do think about subscribing to my channel. Like the video, you can use the thumbs up icon on the on YouTube if you're watching over there, or you can use the like on Facebook, wherever you are watching. And as I say, subscribe to the channel, and you can check out all my other 60-second safety, 60-second science videos over on YouTube. They're all in a very quick, easy to digest format. So that's it. Do tell people about the Survival Skills channel on YouTube. Do spread the word to your biking buddies. And that's it for today. And I do hope that you have enjoyed the show. and that if you are out there today, remember the weather warning from the beginning of the show. It's clouding over here now in just in the 40 minutes I've been online, and the wind is definitely getting up a bit, so do watch out if you are planning on riding today. Thanks once again, and I will see you on hopes on Sunday when we will have our next show, and then the following Wednesday we'll come back and finish off slow riding and hairpin bends.